only one video that I'm going to be doing today, and that, of course, is the news of the week. Although, I could have done 2 videos today if the Minnesota versus Sporting KC game is not moved to tomorrow. And obviously, I'm not happy whatsoever that that game is moved to tomorrow, because both of those teams, whoever wins that one, will now have 2 shorter day of rest compared to the Seattle Sounders heading into the Western Conference Final. And even though they did decided to move the Western Conference Final to Monday to give both of those teams, that whoever moves on into the conference final, an extra day rest, it's still 2 extra day rest for the Seattle Sounders, and also 4 extra day rest for all those Eastern Conference teams that actually have a week to prepare for the Eastern Conference. But it is what it is. It is MLS, and I still don't know why exactly they moved it to Thursday, but it is just what it is, and I guess we'll find out tomorrow to see who exactly is going to be the last team that move on into the conference final. But first of all, in terms of news of the week, there was definitely a lot of news that I'm going to have to go over in this video, and the first news I got to talk about is none other than Matias Almeyda. And I was actually very tempting to potentially make a single video about this, because, usually when something big that is involved with the Quakes, I always tend to make a single video. But since I was relatively busy, I decided to kind of push this into the news of the week. Although I will kind of talk about this a little bit extensively, because he's once again linked with a move back to Liga MX, and that Rayados is once again going to be the team that he is heavily linked with a head coaching gig. Now, when I heard this, I think a week ago, that Almeyda potentially could go back to Liga MX, and once again Rayados is calling for him to be their next head coach after they just fired their current head coach. I kind of didn't believe it, because we've seen this story before, and that I think eventually Almeyda will be convinced enough to stay with the Quakes. But then as the weeks as the day continued to rolls on, and how this rumor started to get even hotter and hotter as the day goes on, I'm actually concerned that this could actually happen. And the reason why I say I'm concerned about this is that if Almeyda does leave the Quakes, that is a big hold for the Quakes to fill this off season, and that there's once again going to be a lot of speculation of who exactly is the next head coach. And, I know some people will say, well, Almeyda during his time with the Quakes, I know he's been promised that they would guide us to the promised land, but he hasn't really done that, with the way that he's only been into one playoff appearance for the Quakes, and they barely made it to the playoffs that time. But what I will argue with what people say about that is that Almeyda has simply changed what the San Jose Earthquakes is, and has played some of the most chaotic and enjoyable soccer that I think any Quakes fan has endured throughout their entire life of this team, even going back to the 2012 days when the Quakes were regularly winning and eventually won the Supporters' Shield. I mean, this team was definitely very entertaining to watch, although at times this team was kind of frustrating to watch, because you just don't know what exactly they're going to bring against. And I think, Almeyda, I know that in his first 2 seasons, he hasn't done as well as I was hoping he can transform this Quakes team, but that's largely due to the fact that the ownership are not giving him the money to spend on players that he wants to do. And when they are giving him the money to spend on players that he does, they don't usually give them a very low amount. And Almeyda's kind of had to go down to his list of secondary players that he wants to bring to this team. And that Almeyda have even openly said that this offseason he wants to stay with the San Jose Earthquakes, but the only way he wants to stay is that if the ownership decided to open their wallet and actually allow him to spend money and bring the players that he wants to recruit to this team. So yeah, I really think that if Almeyda does leave this offseason, some people will say that we'll potentially get a new head coach and everything will be fine. I don't think so. I think this is going to be a really big loss, and especially how big of a name Almeyda is, not just in Liga MX, but also in this league in general. I think this would be a really big loss for the Quakes. And in terms of recruitment too, I mean, if Almeyda stays there, there's going to be the players that want to play for the Quakes and want to play under him, and that this is why, as long as if the ownership potentially give them the money to Almeyda to spend, then those players are going to come. But if they don't give him the money and they force Almeyda to out of this team and go back to Liga MX, those players that potentially want to play for the Quakes because of Almeyda is not going to come to the Quakes because of that. And that could really be a huge problem in terms of our recruitment, and we might not get the players that we want to really get this team to the next level. So really, I'm hoping this rumor will eventually die down and that Almeyda does stay, because if he does not stay, it could definitely be a big damage in terms of this team continue to try to get to the next level and try to maybe sustain themselves to be a regular contender in the playoffs in MLS. Now, speaking of coaching, Ro, for DC United, they have said that they're going to be naming an American head coach in the next 2 weeks, and it's important to note that they said that they're going to name an American head coach because after there's been a lot of rumors of them potentially linked with a head coach in Europe. I remember they were linked with David Wagner and also Eddie Howe, and they even just rumor with a Man City assistant head coach to potentially take charge of their team. They said that looks like it's not going to be the case, and it is going to be just an American head coach, which most likely it's those 4 candidates that I kind of mentioned before in the news of the week that could potentially be the next head coach for DC. So it'll be interesting to see who exactly it is, and once, of course, they announce, I, of course, will immediately do a video talking about that. Now, speaking of head coaches, so you know how yesterday I talked about the surprising move of Greg Vanney decided to move on from TFC and that decided to step down as the head coach of that team? Well, I also kind of talked about how that it seemed like the Greg Vanney to the LA Galaxy rumors have already started, and boy, oh boy, it has definitely started. Like, I kind of checked the Reddit page for MLS to hear like a lot of people have already said that he's going to go to the Galaxy, but I didn't think that some of these MLS experts even said that they think that he is going to be going to the Galaxy, and it makes sense why Greg Vanney wants to go to the Galaxy. This is a team that definitely is considered one of the most iconic team in MLS, and these last couple of years has been become a shadow of their old self. And with Greg Vanney coaching this team and knowing the fact that the Galaxy are willing to spend the money and invest in the squad that Greg Vanney wants the team to do, it makes perfect sense of why he wants to join the Galaxy. Now, that being said, talk about investment. My main concern is that if Greg Vanney does come to the Galaxy and the Galaxy continue to do what they're doing right now, which is just signing these superstar players that is way past their prime and only doing this because they want to have people in their stands, I don't think this is gonna work, especially as I mentioned many times before, we are now in the period of MLS where you just simply cannot go to just buy a European superstar player to come to MLS and expect to have some decent success. And I think Miami is definitely finding that one the hard way with the way that we saw them getting Gonzalo Higuain, and of course that didn't really kind of work out in the end. And the same case with the Galaxy too, where they of course got Chicharito, and yeah, he turns out to be a huge flop and a huge waste of money that they decided to sign him to come to MLS. So as long as they kind of continue that, I don't think Greg Vanney is going to work very, very well in terms of the philosophy that the Galaxy are willing to do when building their squad. But if the Galaxy are being smart and actually do what some other good teams do, which is not just sign these big European superstar player, but actually go down to South America, actually find those hidden gems, or even go to Europe, finding a couple of players that could be like the Pozuelo or the Sebastian Javinko of the world, then this will definitely work perfectly for the Galaxy. And with Greg Vanney there, I think he can definitely guide that team back to MLS Cup contention if the Galaxy are actually being smart in terms of the moves that they are going, or the players that they want to give him, and that they don't do what they're doing right now, which is just years after years going to Europe, spending big chunks of money on these European superstars that is way past their prime. Now, talking about tomorrow's game between Minnesota versus Sporting KC, well, I have some good news for SKC fans, although this is definitely bad news if you're a Loons fan, and I'm definitely not happy to hear this news, because Peter Vanney says that Alan Pulido is going to be available in tomorrow's game against Minnesota, and as a person that have numerously mentioned how big Pulido has been to this SKC side, this will be a huge boost for SKC if he is going to be available and potentially starting in this game. Now, that being said, I am kind of a little bit concerned the fact that maybe they're rushing him to trying to get back into the starting 11. And, I know this is a big game for Sporting KC, because if they win this game, they, of course, would be hosting the Seattle Sounders in the conference final. But that being said, if you rush a player, and we've seen multiple times when you decide to rush a player in a playoff game, it doesn't always work out very well. So, we shall see whether or not if Pulido is going to be available in the starting 11, and if he's going to be available in the starting 11, let's see how he actually played, because that knee injury that he suffered a couple of weeks ago, knee injury does take time to recover, and that if you decide to rush somebody that just come off a knee injury, there could be definitely a lot of risk that you are taking in terms of playing in the starting 11. So we shall see whether or not if he's going to be in the starting 11, or is he going to be coming off the bench in tomorrow's game. Now, Austin FC has been rumored with Club America fullback Paul Aguilera, and while some people will say that this could be a decent signing, because usually finding fullbacks in MLS is not a very easy task, and we've seen a lot of teams that's been having trouble in terms of finding the right fullbacks to be decent in their squad. But that being said, Paul Aguilera, as much as he is a legend of Club America, he's 34 years old. I mean, usually when a fullback is that old, that's right near the end of the career for most fullback. And if they decide to get him, it's probably just going to be a short term kind of deal, and that I'm not quite sure if does he have a lot in the tank in terms of still being a decent players for Austin FC. But that being said, as I said before, of how a lot of teams tends to have troubles in terms of finding a good decent fullback, this could be a decent deal if Austin FC is going to pull this one out. But I really hope that if they're going to potentially get Paul Aguilera, they're not going to be spending a lot of money on him, because fullback is one of those positions that a lot of teams don't usually spend a lot of money, and that if they make him a designated player, this would be a huge mistake if Austin FC is going to do that. Now, the San Jose Earthquakes, I talked about how earlier that they were definitely in some big concern with Almeyda potentially leaving. Well, there is some good news for Quakes fan, and that, of course, is that they are linked with Peruvian striker Matias Almeyda. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. And when I saw this rumor, first of all, I have no idea who exactly this kid is, so I had to kind of Google it and see where he used to play. Well, he's a 21-year-old Peruvian currently playing in the Peruvian First Division, which is the same place that Marcos Lopez used to play, and then we decided to snatch him up just 2 seasons ago. And although he kind of had a rocky first season, he's definitely started to learning the ropes of MLS and started to be a very decent player in terms of that left back position for the Quakes. And I'm really hoping that could be the same case with this kid if the Quakes are, of course, trying to snatch him up to potentially be with them for the foreseeable future. I mean, obviously the Quakes, I know, on the attacking front, one of the most important piece, and probably the most important piece that they need to figure out, is the number 9 position, because we know Wando, as much as I know there's been some speculation that Wando is going to be coming back for one final season. I doubt the fact that he's going to be a regular starter in that final season, and that I think we are going to see him kind of mold more into the super sub role heading into his last season of his career. So we definitely need to have a real number 9 to potentially replace him. And when you look at the depth chart of number 9 for the Quakes, there's not really a lot of good option. Andy Rios obviously is not a good option and is nowhere near as good as what Wando is. And obviously people forget that Danny Houston still is with this team, and I'm kind of shocked that Houston is still on this team. I'm assuming once the Quakes does make their decision in terms of their end of season roster, which I'm actually very interested to see what exactly the Quakes are going to do with the end of season roster, and that, you know, there's a lot of Quakes player that is definitely out of contract heading into next season, and knowing the fact that we can finally get some of those debt weight that we have on our team off our books, it'll be interesting to see who of course would stay and who of course would potentially be leaving this team. And Danny Houston might be a name that I think he could potentially be walking this off season, knowing the fact that he hasn't really got any minutes with the Quakes, both as a sub or a starter for this team. So yeah, it makes perfect sense why the Quakes are desperate in terms of finding a number 9, because time is running out in terms of the fact that Wando, you know, again, there's speculation that he could play one more year, but even if he plays one more year, I don't think he's going to be a regular starter, and you just can't tell me that we're going to once again rely on Wando for his final year of his career to once again carry this team. I mean, it would be nice to see that happen, but I just don't want that to happen, knowing the fact that what happened when Wando decided to pull the plug. And even this offseason, what if he pulls the plug this offseason? What is the Quakes going to do in terms of the striker position? Because there's just no good option whatsoever in this team. Speaking of strikers, Dom Dwyer. Remember him when he used to be a good number 9 for SKC and also for Orlando City? Well, Orlando City basically told him they're not going to renew his contract and that he is going to be heading to free agency. Now, there's no doubt that I think there's going to be a couple of MLS team that's going to be interested in Dom Dwyer, because, you know, I still think Dom Dwyer could definitely be a decent number 9 for a team in MLS and can definitely rediscover his good form that he had a couple of years. And it's just a shame of how these past couple of years has been for him with Orlando, with the way that he's been fighting numerous injury to try to get back into this team. And, you know, this season, even though he was healthy for part of the season, he wasn't really in the starting 11 or in the substitute bench, because he kind of fell out of favor with Orlando. So I think a change of scenery is definitely for him to need if he decided to rediscover his form that he had a couple of years ago. And I'm going to be interested to see that who exactly is going to try to sign him off of free agency, and that there's definitely going to be a lot of teams, especially teams that desperate in terms of trying to find a number 9 to potentially get a chance for Dom Dwyer to play for their team. Now, for Orlando City have also signed a contract extension to Mauricio Pereira, and, you know, besides that bad moment that Pereira had in that game against New England, where he, of course, got a red card that pretty much cost Orlando City a chance to move on into the conference final, no doubt Pereira has been one, if not the best player for Orlando City this season, and he's been part of that core that Oscar Pereira has definitely built with this team, and that I have a feeling he's going to be with this team for a very long time, especially how when Pereira is playing for Orlando City, he just make this team much better than when he, of course, is not available for Orlando City. So it's no surprise that Orlando City immediately snatch him up and trying to extend his contract, which is now the case. Now, another player that has received a contract extension is Corey Burke. So the Union decided that they're going to sign him for a contract extension, and at first I was kind of surprised the Union decided to give him a contract extension, mainly because of the fact that usually when you see kind of like these players that are kind of like a journeyman kind of player, but then they of course eventually return to their old club, usually they it's a nice little reunion, but that reunion probably would last for a very short time. Well, that's not the case for Corey Burke. It's that he is going to be staying for the Union for the foreseeable future because of a contract extension, and it's good to see that of course is the case, because I think Corey Burke, he could definitely have a good future with the Union, and especially the Union potentially needs to keep most of their players, knowing the fact that they're going to have a couple of those players that is potentially going to go to Europe, and a lot of those European teams are trying to fleece their squad. They're going to try to at least keep as much of the team as possible, and that it's good to see that Corey Burke is going to be staying for the Philadelphia Union. Now, another number 9 that's going to be staying with their team and receive a contract extension is Romell Kyoto, as the Montreal Impact have signed him to a contract extension, and like the Pereira deal for Orlando City, this is also a no-brainer. I mean, Kyoto is no doubt the most lethal striker or lethal goal scorer. Well, actually, he's not really a striker, but more like a winger, but he is definitely the most lethal attacker for the Montreal Impact, and talk about how change of scenery can really help a player rediscover the great form that they had in their past couple year career. Well, for Romell Kyoto, remember how he was really struggling for the Dynamo? Well, he got his change of scenery by going to Montreal, and he definitely have rediscovered that good form that he had a couple of years ago when he was with the Houston Dynamo. So it's no surprise the Impact decided to sign him to a contract extension, and that they're happy to keep him for another year, and hope that he's gonna once again have a decent performance like he has with the Impact this season. Now, speaking of the Impact, they do have some bad news that they received this week. Well, there's actually a couple of bad news. The first bad news is that Maxi Urruti will be missing for that Montreal CONCACAF Champions League game against Olympia in December, as he of course undergo a knee surgery. And while Urruti is not a regular starter for this team, I think he's a good utility player coming off the bench for the Impact, and not having him is definitely going to be a miss, as they're going to be a little bit short in terms of the option going forward on the attack in that CONCACAF Champions League game against Olympia. But probably the biggest bad news for Montreal, and a news that pretty much anger a lot of Montreal fans, and even myself included, is the fact that they are rumored to rename their team, and they're looking to rename themselves from the Montreal Impact to none other than Montreal FC. And you know how in the past I have talked about many times where I hate the fact that there's a lot of these new teams that are either naming themselves FC, SC, or United, kind of like a European generic kind of name. And that one of the things that I always love about MLS and the unique factor is that I love that a lot of these teams have a unique nickname right at the end of the city that they of course are based in. Well, it doesn't seem like that of course is going to last with the way that you've seen a lot of these new teams that have gone with European generic soccer name. And the last thing I want to see is an existing club potentially doing the same thing. And the other thing that I don't like, the fact that the Impact is trying to rename themselves Montreal FC and try to copy what Toronto is doing with their name, is the fact that the Impact is an iconic name in MLS. I mean, people don't know it, but this is a name that's been around a Montreal soccer team for a very long time, even before the MLS day when they came into the league in 2012. I mean, back in the early 1990s when they used to play in the USL, that's where the name of course comes by, and it's been a name that's been around the club for almost 30 years now. So I just don't understand why exactly this is the time that they decided to get rid of this iconic name, and that, again, it's no surprise that a lot of Impact fans are not happy with this move. Even the Ultras are sending a message to the club demanding them to not change the name, because it's such an iconic name where it makes no sense whatsoever that they decided to now go with the trend and go with what all these other boring European soccer generic name that seems like a lot of these expansion team is going nowadays. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these news from this week's news all the week? And as always, if there's any news that I of course miss in this week of the new news report from MLS. Let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure to leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.